And now you can always text me or email me for questions regarding this. I think it's something that we need to use
Okay.
to see where the other people in our councils are at.
Okay. All right, I'll try
Then
to.
in the bottom left is just you stop to share, and then you can go back to it later. Then the video comes up again.
Okay, I'll try it again tomorrow.
I think Michelle
We
just
have a
joined.
few people
Hi,
now.
Michelle.
Hi, Michelle.
Well, it always could be, but are you scared?
Is that you, Jose?
Yeah, that was Raven just screaming around, running around. Yeah, yeah. Amy had to go to work. So yeah, I gotta keep an eye on her. Oh, Sam, I keep an eye on her. She pretty much does her own thing already. I just see her. Hi, Diane. Say something. Michelle, say something.
You guys here? Diane, can you hear?
Figures out how to blow this thing up. I mean, I'm scared of a lot of
I did a reading for Michelle this morning, and I invited her to come into the meeting. When I went to Phoenix with Nana Shuni from Guatemala, she happened to be there, and I happened to be in transit to Florida. So a common friend of ours asked Michelle to cross the ceremony in Phoenix, in Mesa actually, Mesa, near Phoenix, suburban Phoenix. So Michelle hosted a Mayan fire ceremony at her place. And this morning I did a reading, and I invited her to come on board today. All right, Jim.
Well,
Take it over, man.
Yeah, let's see what we can do. I'm assuming you both can hear us. Okay. Diane, you may have your volume shut off. I don't know. I just muted Jose for a bit because he's got all the background baby noise going on there. So once again, we had trouble with connection last week on Jose's program, and we had it again today. There was supposedly like 15 people who were coming on, and a couple of them said they couldn't get on, and the others just are not here. So it's we four, which is fine. I think everybody heard Jose's program last week, which was really powerful, and I thought I would go ahead and follow up a little bit with teachings of different elders from different cultures that I've worked with. So we kind of get at that broad spectrum of where the teachings and the prophecies connect and where they might be a little different. And then I'll go into a system that I actually helped design with about 6 other elders several years ago, many years ago now. But I haven't really shared it too much. I did share it here a little bit locally with a couple of groups, and that's working with animal guides in a composite system, which is really powerful as a healing tool. But first, let's dig in a little bit to various ancestral teachings. So Jose already knows a lot of my background, but just a thumbnail sketch on me and who did I learn from and what in the heck am I doing this for anyway. My birth family was Italian Gypsy. My grandmother was a medicine woman for 4 clans, in northern Italy and southern Switzerland. They were shepherds, so they were nomadic. Once she came to the United States, she never functioned as a medicine woman again. I don't know why. She didn't even tell me much of this until the night she passed on, and told me that I would inherit that part of things. So that's my first energy. I've traveled around. Well, I traveled around a lot learning when I was younger, but I did it seriously and sat with elders and lived with various people in different cultures starting in the late 80s. And so I have been adopted by my Lakota family, 2 bears, who was from Pine Ridge, although he lived in Colorado when I worked with him. Umberto, who was my primary Mayan teacher, his family adopted me. And then I worked with Aborigine teachers from Australia, from the backcountry. I didn't go there to learn. They actually came and lived with me for over a year in 2 or 3 different segments of time. And I've learned from Garifuna teachers in Belize and other places in Central America, and some Celtic teachers. So that's pretty much my group. I'm a mongrel, obviously. I was told my job would be to share some of the things and help the 4 colors come together when the time was right, which obviously by almost all of the prophecies is now. So when I started talking and listening more to Jose, it was really fascinating to hear the confirmation, because his teachings are so very similar to what I was taught many years ago. Now they're updated because things have happened, but basically they're the same. So what Jose was teaching last week I found extremely interesting, and his timeline very interesting as well. I was taught a little shorter timeline by my Mayan teachers, but of course not everything is exact. As we learn in the various things, everybody has their own little interpretation. Different groups within a culture have their own interpretations, but basically it was very similar to what I had learned. It also matches up very nicely. Some of my Mayan friends who used to laugh a lot when they heard all the crazy Hollywood scenarios for what was going to happen in 2012 and beyond, if there was a beyond. Those were never the prophecies I heard. The only thing they used to tell me pretty much across the board was that when the time came, they weren't sure what things were going to look like after that, and they knew there would be this extended period that we stepped into this new earth that would be at a higher level, a higher vibration level, and 4D or 5D, depending on who you talk to. And so they didn't put together a lot of documents from that point on. They thought, well, we'll create a calendar once we see where we're going from there. So I see that in many cultures as well. My Lakota family, very, very similar. Their teaching, of course, is the 4 colors coming together to share their gifts. And each color, each culture had their own pieces of the gift that they maintained. And so that's part and parcel, I think, of what I was hearing from Jose as well. They also talked about right around the same time, when the white buffaloes would start to show, this thing would begin, this thing being shifting into the new earth. And that was right around 2012 as well. Their teaching was that there would be about a 8-year window that would be stepping from one time into the other, which we're getting very close to the end of. So we're in the time of chaos. Also that teaching, which we hear in so many cultures, pretty much the eagle and the condor, but that we have to follow the phoenix or the thunderbird, depending on your culture, and that things had to burn down first. Things had to go to ash. And in that way, they would fertilize the garden so we could start to grow what we needed in a good way. And that's a lot of what we're in now. If you listen again to many of the elders who are speaking, And many are starting to speak now and share much, much more, which I find really great, because for a long time, we've had those battles. We're still having some battles. We still have some people who point fingers, who call names, who don't want to share what they have. Some of them it's for ego, some of them it's out of fear. It doesn't matter. There's more than enough of us to be sharing these things now, that the shift and changes can be made. And to me, that's the most critical piece. For my Aborigine teachers, in the Australian way, in the Aborigine way, everything is about dream time. Reality is not in when we're awake. And so their teaching was that they have already dreamed this shift that we're going to now. So when we came to this time, we would start to enact what had already been dreamed by the elders. That's a little harder one to get, at least for me, to get my head around. I had a hard time understanding how can dreams be reality and reality just be enactment of dreams, until I started to think about it. And what we deal with in dreams, in all cultures that I've worked with, what we deal with often are things we're not ready to deal with yet in the physical realm. And so they started dreaming about this change and what that would mean, and the phoenix burning things down so that we could start over and build something in a beautiful, light, and loving way, makes a lot more sense when you do it that way. And so in their customs right now, we're starting to act out the things that their elders dreamed a long, long time ago. Maybe I'll stop there before hitting the others and see, is there anybody want to ask any questions or make any comments? Feel free. I'll turn Jose on.
Thank you. No, sit down.
Yeah, the only comment I have was I work with Zapara community, which is a community that lives in the borders of Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru. And what they do is, in fact, one of my teachers, she just recently passed. I just put a picture of her today in Facebook. So what they do is they drink tea. Everybody in the community drinks tea at 3 a.m. And then they talk about what they dream or what dreams they had those hours. And then they counsel and pick a dream that they like the most or they need to work on the most. Mm-hmm. And then after 2 hours of counseling and drinking tea, they go back to sleep around 5 a.m. and they work. Everybody goes into that dream and work on it. So they use it for healing and for a lot of reasons, but mainly healing. So that's I'm very excited to hear that those teachings are up here in the North 3 years here. That's pretty awesome. Yeah, cool.
Thank you. Yeah, and that's, you're right. We did that a lot too. When I work with Aborigine folks, we would sit around the fire and we would talk at great depth. They would talk about a little bit different than what Jose is saying, but not much. They would often bring in the dreams that elders had many, many generations ago. And they never wrote anything down. Everything in the Aborigines that I worked with was all oral. And so they would tell the stories of the dreams from way back in the past and then share their current dreams and ask me or others in the circle for our dreams, and then begin the discussion that Jose is talking about. And part of that discussion, the beginning would be, well, how do they fit in with the dreams that were had so long ago, or do they? Or do we have to shift the dream? They talked a lot about shifting the dream. By shifting the dream, they meant, do we have to change any of the particulars in order to continue to work towards the outcome we want? So there we go again. There's the connection. It's fascinating. Every time I'm with people, when I was in the 90s, I spent a lot of time in Central America, Belize, Mexico, and Guatemala the most, but also some of the South American countries. But I brought some of my Native American family and friends down with me on one trip that I went down to work with Umberto and Roberto. Those were my two primary Mayan teachers. And we had some Garifuna people there, African descent. And we also had some Brits there. And as we did ceremonies, and we did some Mayan ceremonies there, we were doing fire ceremonies. One of my Lakota brothers by that time, also one of my uncles, led a Lakota sweat lodge. And the interesting thing was when everybody talked, how similar all the prophecies and ceremonies and prayers were, not how different they were. So there was that connectivity around the globe. And we talked a lot about why that happened. And also, why do we have the pyramids all around the globe? And the ones on the far side of the planet are very similar to the ones in Belize, or Guatemala for that point, and other places. The heads, the great stone heads, are around the planet. And so it's those forgotten pieces that I was most interested in. Things we knew, things that were taught way back when. In my birth culture, Italian Gypsy, there was a lot of understanding that everything on the whole planet has always been connected. And I don't know enough about my own birth teachings from that culture. At some point, I'll be learning some of that too. And I know there's a lot of that in some of the yellow teachings, the yellow races. I'm also not well versed in that one either. So the fact that everything is connected makes sense that also the dreams were connected, ceremonies were connected, teachings were connected, because now we're in this time that we need to be in unity. We need to be together to do this. And it's good to see more and more people stepping up. And people bringing amazing new pieces that, today we were with a good friend, and we started looking at some new things that she's carrying around. And it's like, wow, this is eye-opening. Same thing last week, I was talking with somebody, a native friend, and he started sharing some things from his people that I'd never considered before. And so people are opening up to all the elements now and realizing that what's carried by one culture is closely matched by another. Now, the specifics vary. And of course, the Red Nations, most of the teachings tell us their job was to carry the ceremonies. And so they carried the ceremonies when the four colors went their separate ways. And so now they're bringing ceremonies back into things. And I've been honored to learn a lot of those ceremonies from my teachers. But I've also learned ceremonies from my other teachers, my Mayan teachers and my Garifuna teachers from Africa. And so when I do things, I often mix them together. And when Sue and I do things, we create things that male and female can do together, because that's the other important one. From my viewpoint, and from the viewpoint, especially of Two Bears, that when this time came, male and female had to not only be equals, but had to be in harmony, had to be in unity, had to share everything in the way that was meant to happen, for the next Earth to be the one that was actually the successful one. And so that's something we work on a lot, and we'll continue to work on when we make some shifts we're about to do. So other cultures, Garifuna I mentioned, African folks. I did not work with them in Africa. I worked with them in Central and South America. But I learned a lot of their ways. And I found them also to be very, very similar, different in some specifics. They really had a strong connection to the land, their original land in Africa, not their land where they were, although they had that strong connection too. Maybe stronger than any other culture that I've worked with. That and a real understanding of not wanting any human being to be the go-between between themselves and their creator. Now, almost all of us who are spiritual have that sense. I think. Certainly most of the ones I work with. But for them, it was really a critical point. And for them, and this makes sense, as it does with the Native Americans, when the Europeans came in and started bringing even more and more religion and Christianity, and all the atrocities started happening to them, you can understand why they felt that way. But it predates that. It was always thought that no one was needed between the two. The only difference was if a medicine person worked with you, they were to help you connect even stronger, or they were to lead circles or groups so that there could be a joint sharing of ceremony and prayers. And that's pretty much what I've been taught by just about every culture, when it's an integrity. When it's not, it's because somebody's just doing something, I think, for their own sense of well-being, for their own ego. And so, forgot where I was going with that one. Okay, I'll pause and take a breath and see if anyone wants to say anything now or has any comments or questions. I assume Jose can unmute himself, I think, if he wishes. I don't think Diane's able to, for some reason, get her mic on. I don't know why.
I just wanted to add to the ceremonial keepers. So keepers of the ceremony. You know, in the history of the man world that I carry, they gave me or made me responsible for the world history with the Mayan eyes for the year 1444 to the year 1529. And in this kind of history, which again is only spoken, well, not really. You know, I've written 13 books, so I have extensively written and expanded on what I carry. But this piece of the story about the ceremonies, it tells us that the yellow rays, you know how we have the 4 directions color wheel? So the yellow rays in this piece of the story is in charge of the water ceremonies, the water rituals. And then the black race is in charge of the air rituals. And then the red race is in charge of the Mother Earth or the Earth rituals. And the white race is in charge of the fire ritual. So I think, if I remember correctly, a while back, someone was touching this from the elders, and it was kind of around the same lines. Is that still correct? Is that correct, Jim?
Do that again, Jose. I lost part of what you said.
Yeah, I was saying that the story in the Mayan world goes that the white race is in charge of the fire rituals, the black race in charge of the air, the yellow race in charge of the water,
yep.
And the red is in charge of the earth rituals. So I am very familiar with air, water, and fire rituals, not so much with earth rituals. And I also have this, the 5th element, which goes into the future of the Mayan world, you know, in the year 77. According to those elders, the ether ceremonies belong to everyone. It's what they call when it starts in this period of elimination, started in 2012, where you know, the ceremonies are united and we all kind of like blend into one big rainbow. So I wanted to bring that out to see if I'm pretty sure the Lakota tradition has kind of the same story somewhere.
Yeah, they do. Actually, a lot of the different cultures have a very similar one, and you're right. But what I was The only difference I had, and most of my Lakota teachers, and it varies by which tribe you're talking to, was that they were to carry primarily ceremonies. And they did. And the Lakota carried ceremonies here specifically for Native Americans because so many of the tribes lost their ceremonies when the Great Assault happened from the Europeans. And so then the Lakota went out and retaught them ceremonies. But that shifted some of the ceremonies, obviously. And yeah, I'm with you. I know more of fire because I am fire, land, and air. And now I'm learning more and more of water because it's become more and more critical over the last couple of years. So yes, you're right. I think the other important thing, certainly in the Native American tradition, and certainly in my birth tradition, the white, red, black, and yellow of the four colors, which is on my ribbon shirt here today, does not mean Native American, Caucasian. It means the energy of that color. And so this means the white races in general, not specifically just meaning, okay, it's just Caucasian. This doesn't mean it's just Native American. It's representing the four colors of people, and you can't get all people in that. I'm olive-skinned by birth, Northern Italy. And so I don't really fit in one of those. So for me, I guess you would blend a little bit of the red with a little white and throw in a dab of black, and you've got olive. And so that was the teaching of the four colors. If you read some of Black Elk's thoughts, especially Black Elk Speaks, and read his prophecy and his vision of the four colors coming together, it becomes very clear, because he's very clear that, hey, I'm not just talking about one little part here. I'm talking about, in general, red people carry this energy and black people carry this energy. We need to bring them together so we have the whole wheel of color represented. Is that what you know, Jose, or is that different?
That is the hope, that we all come together for the next, 400 years, starting with this period of 20 years that ends in 2032. So yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's enough on those parts. If everybody's good with that, I'll dig into I'll shift into animal guides and animal viewing, if that's all right. And it's
Please do, yeah.
Yeah. It's not a huge shift. I guess Two Bears was the first one who worked with me extensively with animals and animal guides and animals for healing. My Mayan teachers did later on as well, when I first started sitting with them. I have a feeling, partly because they understood my deep connection to the animal nations, as well as the Earth Mother. Those were my strongest connections coming into this work and stepping up on the road when I was finally willing to do that. And so they taught me a lot about that. They also taught me later a lot of plant medicine and other things. But the animals for me have always been great teachers, great guides, great helpers when I try to bring in any healing energy for whatever the issue is. And so I learned from each tradition. My Lakota family, when they adopted me, originally named me Red Wolf. That was the name they gave me. I had no idea why. I hadn't done anything that I was aware of with wolves to that point. In fact, I had. The wolves have been walking with me my whole life. I just didn't understand it. Shortly after they did that, I was asked to participate in the Graywolf recovery program in Yellowstone and help with some of the educational materials, which I gratefully did. And not long after that, I went off to run a Red Wolf recovery program. So they saw a lot of the energy there. It was a few years later, after I had gone through some really dark times, harrowing times, painful times. That's another whole show, which I won't bore people with, that they gave me permission, and they actually suggested that I change my name from Red Wolf to Graywolf. Red Wolf is the most endangered wolf out there, and at one point they were afraid I might not make it through. Graywolf is the strongest, most resilient wolf out there. So they were honoring me by saying, okay, you've gotten through this hell you had to go through, so now Graywolf should be your name. So I had the name of an animal right there from my Lakota family. And we worked with a lot of other animals on the medicine wheel. As I began to learn the medicine wheel and the ceremonies to do around it, started to fill in the animals. And that was great. And I love working with animal medicine. Four-leggeds, wingeds, finned, I don't care. I love them all. Creepy crawlies, great. When I first started going to Belize, and I met some Garifuna people. And I was working with them some, and they suggested I go and meet with Umberto, this elder I mentioned before. Umberto was upland. He was not far from the Jaguar Preserve, way in the middle of nowhere with his family and a small village that was in there. And so when I met him, we just clicked. And just as Two Bears did, he asked me if I wanted to learn more, and of course I did. And he said, well, I want to learn more about Native American ways. So we had a nice sharing going on, although I most definitely was the student and he was the elder. He also immediately started working on animals. And I had a friend in Belize whose father ran the Department of Antiquities, which was also responsible for sites that have been uncovered, ancient sites, mostly Mayan, but I think there were some others as well. And they invited me to go to a Mayan city that was being excavated near Belmopan, which is the capital of Belize. And so I asked Umberto if he could go along, and he did. And sorry, just answering Jose. As they started to uncover things, what we found in the middle of this huge, what's the word? A huge space, like a meeting space would have been in the middle of the town, was a medicine wheel with different animals, different plants, different energies, but still a medicine wheel. And of course, they'd used the animals and plants and so forth that were common to their area. And I started to realize that all of these things are connected around the globe. Well, over time, as I worked with plant medicine down there, with Rosita and some other plant medicine people, and Umberto and Roberto with the animals, I started to see that maybe there was a connection between these different animals. And that's when I sat with some of these other folks and suggested we look to see how do these animals connect. And we came up with this idea for a composite animal totem, which I have worked with more myself in the last couple of years. I just haven't shared too much of it yet. It is kind of putting the animals, your own personal animal guides, around. It's just you and I now, Diane. So yeah, you've got the papers. I'm not going to put them up. So you put your own totems around a medicine wheel construct. That one. And how do you do that? Well, for mine, my Native American, I'll start with my primary totem was wolf. It had been with me since I was born. I just didn't know it until later on. So wolf for me sits in the east of my personal animal totem wheel. My Mayan totem was dog. And so that went in the West because they're balancing energies. They're cousins, wolf and dog. My other two in the South was snake, which was my Native American totem, and in the North was scorpion, which is my astrological sign. So there were my four. Now others that I've worked with sometimes use a different animal in other words, if you're working with someone in the yellow races who works with their energy, then they would probably put their Chinese or their whatever their culture is, their animal totem in place of one of those. It may not be their primary totem because, like me, I wasn't walking any of this walk when I realized the wolf was my totem. But it may be their primary animal guide. And so once you have that, what you realize is that these four can go, well, on my own, for example, I have wolf and dog, the wild canine and the tame canine. But both are about community. Both are about protection. Both are about love. Both are about fun. In the North and South, I've got snake and scorpion, the other side of me, I guess. The ones that are a little more acerbic, a little more poisonous, the ones that give you that edge when needed, and those two are complementary. I didn't realize that until I started creating this. That's how it worked out. And I've seen that happen in other people, not always. It's a good healing tool, however, if you see that the animal guides that show up for somebody in the East and the West are not compatible, or the North and the South are not compatible. Then you've got somebody who's probably a bit out of balance, because there should be some sort of connection, East and West and North and South. Not always, but most often. And I've had people actually point it out to me about themselves. Well, I don't feel quite right because sometimes I feel really happy and sometimes really angry when I'm working in the East or working in the West. Well, you shouldn't be feeling that way. You should feel balance, whichever spoke of the medicine wheel you're on. Oh boy, excuse me. Anyway, what else on that? I was going to open it up and do people's wheel, but since it's only you and I, Diane, there's not really any reason to do that. This is funny. Well, Sue's back there too, but she's working on something else. No sense both of us being on for this. I think I'm gonna stop recording at this point. She looks like a woman we saw recently.
Yeah, wow.
Okay.